paranoid about eating oysters. I don't eat raw oysters. I like mine baked, broiled, or fried. But just to let you know, this is out there.
You're going to start?
Okay, sure. So let me just introduce myself to you. My name is Dr. Gregory Buck. I'm an associate professor of biology and biomedical sciences at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And I always like to give people a little bit of background about myself, and especially for the young people back there, to let you know that you don't have to be a genius to do this. I got my bachelor's degree in biology from Morehouse College in Atlanta. I worked for a little while. I actually worked retail. Matter of fact, I can tell you that 4 major Macy's stores in Atlanta, North Lake, South Lake, Cumberland, and Perimeter. I know them really well because I worked there. And then I got a job at the DeKalb County Water Treatment Plant. So I've actually done water treatment. When that played out, I actually did research for a while at Emory University. It's a huge university in Atlanta. They have a lot of money. Basically, the president of Coca-Cola gave them $2 billion about 30 years ago, and they've blown that up now to about $6 billion. So I worked there for a while as a lab technician, working with salmonella. So those of you who like to eat chicken, chickens normally have salmonella, chickens and turkeys. And then that job ended, so I started teaching high school, and I taught 2 different places in Metro Atlanta. The final place I taught was a small community, Douglas County, halfway between Atlanta and the Alabama line. And I got a master's in Georgia State in microbiology and in microbial genetics. Basically, I play with genes, not genes that you wear, but genes like DNA. And then I went back and taught high school a little while longer out in Douglas County, and then mid-1990s, I said, I can't deal with this, I can't fight this feeling anymore. So the kids were getting crazier, and I decided to go back, so I went back to Georgia State and I got a Ph.D. in molecular genetics. And the bacteria that I actually worked with was called Pseudomonas. And Pseudomonas can also cause, if you work in the burn unit, probably not here, but up at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, worst thing you can actually deal with is have a patient with burns, over 50% of their body get a Pseudomonas infection. Not good. Basically, their skin is going to turn green like Mrs. Hancock's shirt right there, and it's not a good thing. So after I finished my PhD, I went back to Emory again, this time with a few more credentials, and I did a postdoctoral fellowship in the pathology department at Emory University. And I was working and working and working, and my boss was telling me something. My boss had been a full professor of medicine. He was an MD at Johns Hopkins, University of Michigan, and now he was at Emory. And he said, do you really want to deal with this rat race? Because for every 3 grants I write, I get 1. Most people, for every 10 grants they write, they might get 1. So I said, let me look. I've been teaching for a while. I've done the research, so let me look. So I looked for jobs, and I found Texas A&M Corpus Christi was hiring. That was 2001, and I've been here ever since. So some of the courses that I teach the sophomore course in microbiology. For the nurses, I actually started the nursing microbiology course at A&M Corpus, but I turned it over to somebody because it grew from 48 students up to like 120, and I couldn't handle it anymore. I still teach the majors in microbiology. That's roughly between 80 and 120. I teach virology. This summer I'm teaching virology, or the study of viruses, to seniors. And I also teach immunology. For those of you who don't know, basically immunology looks at biology, but it looks like if something comes in and invades you, how does your body fight it off? Or if you get some problem like a transplant, how does your body help to fight that off? So those are the courses. I'm also biomedical sciences program coordinator. So what I do is I also oversee 5 other faculty members and 700 students. The life science department at A&M Corpus. Don't know if you're in college yet. Are you in college? Are you still in high school?
He's just starting his freshman year in high school.
Okay, so you've got a little ways to go. You're the same age as one of my nieces back in Atlanta. But one of the things is life sciences encompasses biology, marine biology, and biomedical sciences. So I have 700 students under the department chairman, and our goal is to basically, if they want to go pre-med, pre-dent, pre-vet, pre-physician assistant, we try to prepare them so that they can apply and be successful in their applications. So that's a little bit of background about myself. So what I'm going to do, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. This doesn't apply to you. You're way over 11. However, as I said before, for a lot of people, if you have really young kids, although they probably see worse things in video games now, I'm going to show you a few graphic bloody images for this. I was talking to some folks before we started this. I said, the worst images I'm not going to show you, or the one where somebody loses half their face to Vibrio. So one of the things I like doing is telling you what you should learn from this talk rather than listening to me be a talking head. And I always tell my students, I don't want to be like the teacher in the Charlie Brown cartoon where you're basically going blah, 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 blah. I want you to, by the time you finish this, the bottom line is, I want you to respect but not fear Vibrio vulnificus. That's the bottom line for this. So officially, Mrs. Hancock needed specific outcomes here, so as the former high school teacher in me, I gave them. But the bottom line is I'm going to cover all of them by the time this talk is over. And again, feel free to interrupt me if you've got any questions or comments. So this is Vibrio vulnificus. It's magnified about 1 million times. I got this off the web. This was actually taken with an electron microscope. I don't have an electron microscope in my lab. We do have one at A&M Corpus. So that's off the web. Vibrio is a bacterium. It's not a virus. And for some of you, you're wondering, what difference does it make and why should I care? Well, there is a little bit of difference. Bacteria are small, but you can see them under a light microscope, like the ones in the lab. You can see them. Their general size, and I know 0.3 to 10 microns means very little to you. I'll give you this measurement. Take a yardstick, that's roughly 1 meter. Shrink it by 1 million, that's a micron. So that puts it in perspective. Bacteria can live in a host, or they can live in the environment. Like you can have bacteria on any of these surfaces. But they can live either in the host or not in the host. I was talking to some people, and roughly, we postulate that there's roughly 1 trillion bacteria in existence. We only know about 12,000 of them. And of those 12,000, we can only take 0.4% and streak them on agar plates, or grow them up in a test tube. So most of the bacteria that we're learning about now, we're doing it because we're learning about genetics and genes. So I'm going to tell this young man right here, I'm going to pitch it to you. If you really want to go out and make some money, if you're really interested in science, although you could probably make more in business, I'll just be straight up honest with you. Or you can even make more as a plumber, and I'll just be straight up with you about that. But if you really like science, if you really want to do this and money is no objective, yeah. Go to school, finish high school, take as much math, chemistry, and science as you can, and then learn to do something called bioinformatics. That's where you're designing drugs specifically for somebody's genome, and that's going to be a real hot area. For somebody like myself who's over 55, that ship has sailed. I'm beyond that because I don't want to go back and learn something that's going to take me about 9 months to learn, even with a Ph.D. But you're young, you're energetic, your mind is sharp. Look at that. And even if you aren't interested in it, tell your friends about it. It's called bioinformatics. So pass that along for me, will you? Okay. Viruses. Viruses include things like HIV, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, flu, measles, mumps. Those are viruses. Viruses basically are really, really small. They're roughly 0.01 to 0.03 microns. There are some big viruses lately they've discovered, like in water tanks in England, that are a little bit larger, as large as the bacterium, but basically you can only see a virus underneath a microscope. Viruses are obligate intracellular parasites. That means that for them to replicate, they've got to be inside a cell. The cell can be an animal, the cell can be a plant, the cell can be a bacteria, the cell can be a fungus, the cell can be any sort of living thing, but they've got to replicate inside a cell. I will say this. Let's say that I have the flu. I sneeze on my left hand. I don't do the way that you folks in the hospital tell people to do. I sneeze on my hand. I go touch this door. That door is now contaminated with that virus. That door is now called a fomite. Contaminated inanimate object. How long will that virus last? Depends on the virus. If it's common cold, which is caused by rhinovirus, it'll last probably about 48 hours. If it's flu, it probably will last maybe between 4 and 8 hours. Not as long, but long enough. So viruses have to have a cell to replicate in, and they usually find it, in the case of flu, inside your nose and your lungs. So bacteria and viruses are different. What's the take-home message? When you go to the doctor and ask them for an antibiotic to treat a cold, the doctors are probably telling you no, am I right? That's because antibiotics don't work on viruses, so the common cold, they tell you go to H-E-B or Walgreens and buy the Zicam or something which has zinc in it, and that will basically knock off your cold 1 extra day. So instead of having it for 4 days, you have it for 3 days. That's what Zicam does. This is a picture, and it might make more sense to you. This cell represents E. coli. E. coli is about 2 microns in length. The textbook said it's 3 microns. I've worked with E. coli since 1978. The odds of E. coli being 3 microns are as likely as the average person walking in this room is going to be the size of LeBron James or Shaquille O'Neal. That's not going to happen. I'm just going to tell you that. This is a virus phage, a bacteriophage called T4. Basically, that's even big for a virus. Most viruses are like adenovirus, which can also cause a common cold, or tobacco mosaic virus. And here, by comparison, is a human red blood cell, which is about 5 microns. So basically, and for the adults in this room, this might make some sense. Think of factors of 10. A virus is 10 times smaller than a bacteria. A bacteria is 10 times as small as a human cell. And that way it works. Or for the young man back there in high school, orders of magnitude. So learn scientific notation. If you forgot it in middle school or junior high, go back and learn it, because it'll make more sense now. Okay? So what's Vibrio? This is actually a streak of Vibrio. Gabriel Ramirez now works for Corpus Christi water treatment plant. So I'm sure all of you up here in Cuero heard about our water situation last year with 3 different water boils. He wasn't responsible for that. Basically, Corpus Christi just hasn't seen about its water infrastructure for 30 years, and we're now paying the price. But that's my personal opinion. That doesn't represent the opinion of Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, the Department of Life Sciences, the College of Science and Engineering. That's just Gregory Buck's opinion, having worked in a water treatment plant. But that's Vibrio. And it's a strain, it's actually called a wild-type strain. That's the strain that causes disease. And 27562, we know it's caused disease because that's how we found it. Vibrio bacteria are classified in 2 ways, and the nurses will know what I'm talking about. They can be gram positives or gram negatives. For the public, all you need to know is that gram positives have 1 membrane around them, gram negatives have 2. And no, ladies, I'm not going to go into acid-fast bacteria, which are a totally different story altogether. I'll let the nurses and the CLS people can talk about that separately after lunch or something, but I'm not going to confuse the public about that. Mesophilic. Some of the people here had asked about the temperature. Mesophilic bacteria grow best at body temperature. Is that a coincidence? Probably so. but they grow best at around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius. The range for mesophilic bacteria is roughly between about 65 degrees, about 60, 62 degrees Fahrenheit, up to about 120 degrees. So if you put a petri dish of bacteria in your car or truck, closed the door and left it out in the sun for about 5 or 6 hours, probably you're going to kill off all the bacteria because it's going to reach 150 Fahrenheit in that vehicle, especially if the sun's blazing on it. That's why I parked outside next to a tree out in the parking lot. Monotrichous, what does that really mean? It means Vibrios have one little hair coming up them called a flagellum that allows them to move. In water or in your tissues? Hopefully not. G plus C don't worry about, but this particular plate can detect Vibrio, and if they're yellow, they're Vibrio vulnificus. If they're green, they're probably parahemolyticus, but I'll talk about that a little while later. And most bacteria have 2 pieces of DNA in them, 1 piece of DNA in them. Vibrios have 2, that's the exception. But most other bacteria like E. coli or Salmonella, it's got 1 piece of DNA in it. So this is why we can never get rid of all the Vibrios. It doesn't matter how much bleach you dump in the water, how much peroxide, whatever. Vibrios grow on seaweed. Vibrios grow on shells and shrimp and crabs. Vibrios bind to mucus found on fish skin. Vibrios are concentrated in the tissues of, shellfish such as oysters, clams, and mussels. So there's estimated to be 100 quintillion Vibrio vulnificus cells in the world oceans. That's 10 to the 20th power, 1 followed by 21 zeros. So ladies and gentlemen, are we ever going to get rid of all the Vibrios? Sure won't. No way, no shape, no form. And they're actually part of the ecosystem. Bacteria in the ecosystem actually get eaten by organisms called zooplankton, and the zooplankton get eaten by small crustaceans like, miniature shrimp, and the miniature shrimp get eaten by small fish. The small fish get eaten by larger fish. The larger fish get eaten by larger fish or mammals, and then ultimately the apex predators are going to be your great white sharks, or in our case, they're going to be the humans. So that's called a food chain. And so if you really disrupt bacteria, you're going to disrupt the food chain. There's 3 different flavors of Vibrio vulnificus for this bacteria. You could think of them as basically ethnic groups, but the ethnic groups can all interact with each other. Biotype 1 causes human disease. Biotype 2 causes fish disease. Biotype 3 may cause human diseases, but they actually discovered it in tilapia. And I think somebody before we were talking actually asked, saltwater, sort of fresh water? Yeah, but the Vibrios need salt. One of the things about Vibrios is that the fancy term is halophilic. It means they need salt. Vibrios need a certain amount of salt in them. So why biotype 3 is surviving, I guess I don't really know why, but most of the time Vibrio vulnificus needs about 2% salt. You can go down to like 0.5% salt. They just don't grow too well. But this one, discovered from tilapia in Israel, actually does all right. But they're still all Vibrios. All right, picture time. Yes. There are 2 different flavors of type 1 Vibrios. Type C causes clinical disease. Type E is out in the environment. However, both of them can cause disease. And what you see here is typical of Vibrio. This is called necrotizing fasciitis. This is your so-called flesh-eating disease. What you see here are that you're getting these fluid-filled blisters. They start off small, and then they start coalescing. The technical term that the nurses will remember is purpura, and then they're going to form ecchymoses. And these huge blisters get bigger and bigger. How did necrotizing fasciitis get its name? It gets its name because you see these on the skin, but it's actually going a little bit deeper. It's actually going subcutaneous, not not epidermis, but into the dermis, and then to the covering of the muscle. The covering of the muscle, for those nurses who remember their AMP1, is called a fascia. So necrotizing fasciitis means your fascia, your muscle covering, starts dying. If it gets further deeper, then that's gangrene. But the question as the public is there a difference between the way that you're going to treat necrotizing fasciitis versus gas gangrene? I'm not a clinician. I would probably say unlikely. They're going to treat it the same way. By the fancy term is debridement. The not so fancy term is they're going to go in, put you in surgery, and they're going to scrape it out and flood it with saline, and then add some antibiotics, and then stitch you back up and send you back in and give you IV antibiotics. The big problem with Vibrios is that these can move from your muscle, or if you eat them, from oysters, from your GI tract into your blood. When that happens, you've got an old-fashioned term called blood poisoning. The fancy term now is sepsis. Sepsis means you've got bacteria or bacterial products, parts of their membrane, things like that, in the blood. And that causes a whole lot of reactions to occur, and the result of those reactions are different grades of shock. And shock is you don't get enough blood to your vital organs. You don't get enough blood to your brain, to your heart, to your lungs, to your liver, to your spleen, to your kidneys. When that happens, your body compensates. You stop pushing blood to your limbs, right here, 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 and here, and you start pushing it up to your organs. Your body compensates again by changing your blood pressure. It can go up, it can go down. And all the manifestations of shock, your body's releasing chemicals called interferons and cytokines, and that's why you can be hot one minute and cold the next. And if left untreated, shock will kill you. So Vibrios, if left untreated, it can send you into shock, and that can cause death. You can't read this. I can barely read it. But basically it gives counts, and I'll actually give you a bigger table, roughly, and we were actually talking about this from 2007 to like 2011 in terms of Vibrio infections in Texas. It went from 35 down to about 11. And now it's back up. I think an article in San Antonio Express News on mysanantonio.com stated that as of today, I think there have been 59 cases of Vibrio in the state of Texas for 2017. However, and this is where I have to distinguish hype from reality, the odds of your getting a Vibrio infection are roughly about 1 in a million. There's a fancy term for those of you who remember it, incidence and prevalence. Prevalence, which is old and new cases, is roughly 0.1 per 100,000. That's basically 1 in a million. So as I told a person last year when I got interviewed 15 times about Vibrios, basically the odds of, we can take the entire population of the city of Austin, you can put them in the waters off Port Aransas and Ingleside and around Corpus Christi. You can bring them all back out. Odds are one person out of that million is going to get a Vibrio infection. Now, it might be higher, or you may get none, but those are the general odds. So roughly, the odds of your getting a Vibrio infection from being in water are, you're more likely to get struck by lightning on the golf course. But still, the goal here is to educate the public and to let you know, because as one of my teachers told me a long time ago, knowledge is power. So if you have the knowledge, you have the power, and you decide how you want to go into water. You decide, do you want to wear waders? You decide to check your legs and your feet for cuts. You decide if you have certain predisposing conditions, whether you're going to get into water or fish or not that day. You make that decision. And I'll talk about those predisposing factors in the next couple of slides. These are the diseases. So I've told you about basically all of them, but just to recap, gastroenteritis, GI problems, stomach and intestinal problems, from eating raw or undercooked mollusks, oysters. Every time there's a really great seafood, several great seafood restaurants in Corpus. Water Street, Snoopy's, let's see, Laguna Shore, Laguna Reef, really great. When I eat the oysters, I eat them broiled or fried. I don't eat raw oysters. Because there is a chance. It's a small chance, it's a slim chance, it's roughly about 1%, but there is a chance that, you know, the oysters can be out a little too long, not on ice, and the Vibrios start growing, because they can grow between, 60 Fahrenheit and 120. So if it's room temperature right now in this room, it's probably about, 75, 76 Fahrenheit. That's about 24 and a half Celsius. Yeah, Vibrios will grow. I mean, my grad student and I actually grew out some Vibrios on July 4th. Yeah, I actually worked with my student July 4th on a holiday, but he's trying to graduate and I'm trying to get him graduated. So we took a Petri plate out the incubator. The incubator was about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. We took it out, put it at room temperature. And about 4 hours, the Vibrios started growing. They went from being maybe the size of a pinhead to being maybe the size of a mole on somebody's face. So they will grow at room temperature. Septicemia, I've talked about blood poisoning, and then wound infections, talked about necrotizing fasciitis. This article did not interview me. This is actually Mr. David Sykes. He's the columnist for the Corpus Christi Caller-Times, and he normally does sports and outdoor fishing, things like that. But he did this article a long time ago, and normally, if he doesn't do an article in the Caller-Times each summer, somebody else does. The fun part. Several of you had asked me what's the progression of Vibrio. So one of my former grad students, Zet, actually got this, so I just took it from her slide for her master's defense. Hey, I have to take ideas from the best. So this person pricked her finger on a fish hook. This was a person in Louisiana. She posted this up on Facebook. I mean, personally, as the young people would say, to me, that's TMI, too much information, but you know, whatever floats your boat. So 10:30 a.m. Sunday fishing. Gets a little bit darker. By 9:30, it's a little darker. By 6:30 Monday, getting a little darker. By 8:30 Monday, she visits her family doctor because it's getting real dark, as that gentleman said earlier. It's changing color. And the more important thing is that it's really hurting. This is a painful disease. You won't sleep through this.
It gets hot.
Yeah, it gets hot because you're also running a fever. I mean, you don't have to say this, but your fever was probably between 101 and 103. Yeah. So you're not going to be comfortable. Really, I don't know why the doctor didn't treat her here. Again, I'm not a clinician, so I'm not going to second guess. But really, she should have gotten some antibiotics right here. Continue. By 9:30 p.m. Monday, 10:30, she's at the ER. By day 4, she's admitted to the ER, and it's looking like that. So now they give her a course of antibiotics, and then it gets back to normal. But that's the documentation. So you see how fast this really can go? Anywhere between 8 to 24 hours? Yeah, this is fast.
Or quicker.
Or a little quicker. Yeah. I mean, I've seen some cases, the entire range for vibriosis is roughly between 4 hours to 4 days. But that's like 4 hours to 4 days is like saying people are either the size of Mini-Me or they're the size of, Shaquille O'Neal. Most people, you're gonna know something in about 6 to 8 hours. That's a more gross picture of necrotizing fasciitis. Again, the gross out factor, but that's better than some of the other pictures. The sepsis, really it tells the organs that you involve, but a long time ago, a professor told me, when you think of a body system, always go from head to toe. So brain, heart, lungs, liver, spleen, kidneys. And those are the organs that are affected if you eat Vibrios or you get a wound, inoculate them in, and it starts getting into your blood. So I'm not going to keep on that. Here's the recent patient, and I'll just tell you, I looked this up on the web because I had kept hearing about it, and the Corpus Christi media, KIII, not the Fox affiliate, but the ABC affiliate and the NBC affiliate, KRIS, talked about this. I guess KUQI is the Fox affiliate between Houston and Corpus. I don't normally watch them, but I'm sure they're talking about it. Mr. Brad Guyon of Ingleside, Texas, contracted vibriosis while wade fishing in Rockport. He's currently being treated at University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, and I actually did a summer sabbatical there. They have great facilities. I actually know the former department chair and the current department chair of microbiology. They do some wonderful work. He's currently listed in fair condition, and if you really want to know more about it, that's the website. So fair condition means that he is slowly responding to antibiotics. That's what it sounds like to me. These updated Vibrio statistics, again, you can't read, but I'll just read them off to you because I actually updated them yesterday. Basically, roughly, the total number of cases of Vibrio in the United States has increased. In 2006, it was 554. 2014, it was 1252, the last time I could get total stats on it. They actually update the stats, but the stats normally take about 2 to 3 years to get up at the CDC website. I know that's hard for the public to understand, but having interviewed for a lot of jobs at the CDC and not getting one until I had the job at A&M Corpus Christi, I had a lot of friends in grad school who ended up working at CDC, and they've told me, yes, the work is nice and wonderful, but if there's something more important, your section chief is going to shuffle you off to that. Case in point, one of my friends actually worked on syphilis. When other diseases came up, he got shunted from syphilis to SARS. The boss just walked in his lab one day and she told him, "You're no longer working on syphilis, you're going to work on SARS. There's a lab down the hall for you. Good luck, and I'll see you next Monday to find out your progress." So Vibrio, while it's important, it's not major importance. This year we've had about 59 cases in Texas. In 2016 we had 101. So right now we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. The big peaks for Vibrios are in the water. When the water temperature gets up above 60 Fahrenheit, that's when you start seeing more and more Vibrios. So roughly, yes sir?
How many cases of that is the fasciitis and not the GI stuff of the 59?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think they said, and I will have to go back to the website, but I think it's roughly about 17, and I may have gotten the numbers wrong because I looked at that just before I came over here and gave my talk. I think there were maybe about 17 that were ingestion, and then maybe about 18 or 19 where it was a wound, and then the remainder, they have no clue. But that's a good question. So the deaths, this is a little bit more important. The deaths from Vibrio vulnificus in the US, out of all the cases, roughly 16 going up to about 34 fatalities. So roughly you can do the calculations per, the total number of cases in the US and then look at the total US population. Total US population is about 320 million. For the population of Texas, it's about 28 million. So I actually tell my students, first of all, I ask them how many people are there in Texas. Most of my students have no clue. A few will say 24 million, which is a 2010 census, so at least they sort of know. But right now we've got about 28 million people in Texas. So roughly the prevalence is about 1 in a million. So this is, while it's not a common disease, it gets media attention. So what are the risk factors for Vibrio infection? Age. While you can get vibriosis if you wander in the water with a cut, most likely, most of the cases for Vibrio happen at age 50 or more. For the nursing staff, there are reports that males are more susceptible to females. I don't know if that's due to hormonal levels I think it may be because there are more guys out there weight fishing or doing things in the water than females. And as you saw from the picture of the person with the finger problem, that was a woman. So I'm not so sure, going by the bias that you learned in class, when you did your studies a long time ago, I'm not sure that males have a greater predisposition than females. So I'll leave that alone. Are you diabetic? If you're diabetic, you have a greater risk of getting Vibrio. Do you have liver disease? Whether you have cirrhosis, hepatitis, whether it's alcohol related or related to some other factors, you run a greater risk. Kidney disease. If you're on dialysis, you really should stay out the water. Hemochromatosis, that's a really technical term. It means iron-rich blood. Vibrios, actually most bacteria need iron. Vibrios love it. So if you've got blood that has too high an iron level, Vibrios are going to go and settle in your body like, the Cuero football team gets the all-you-can-eat buffet at Golden Corral. Are you immunocompromised for any reason? HIV? Have you had chemotherapy? Have you had radiation therapy? Do you have a genetic predisposition for being immunocompromised? Stay out the water. Last but not least, certain cancer in general gives you a greater risk factor. So how can you prevent Vibrio infections? This is the take-home message. It's probably what you all came here to find out. 1, if you've got open cuts or wounds, don't get in marine or brackish bay waters. Number 2, if you get in, wash thoroughly with soap and water after wading in the ocean or in the bays. I tell my students, you really don't need antibacterial soaps that have triclosan in them. Basic soap and water will work. If you feel more comfortable having the triclosan or the hexachlorophene in your water and your soap, go ahead, but you really don't need it. Even in my lab, I don't use soaps with hexachlorophene or triclosan. The antibacterial stuff that they advertise on the label, I generally don't add it. And generally speaking, we've done okay. If you're going to shuck oysters, pull out crabs, manipulate shrimp that you caught, or handling fish hooks, wear the gloves. And I was telling some people about this. You can go to H-E-B and buy all one-size-fits-all nitrile gloves. I think a box of them is like $5. Wear those. And then still wash your hands afterward. Do you have predisposing conditions? If you go in ocean or estuarine waters, wear waders. Be careful about eating undercooked or raw shellfish. Personally, I'm not into sushi. Those raw oysters that I see people, gulping down at the bars in Corpus, well, that's on them. There is a risk, and I'll even tell you a story. Back in Atlanta, I saw a case about 10 years ago where a woman, she was actually a member of the Fulton County Sheriff's Department in Atlanta, and she was getting ready to retire, and she was diabetic. She went to a bar. I won't name the bar. The bar's near the Atlanta airport on Virginia Avenue. I'll say that much. Not my favorite bar. I once dumped a girlfriend there, but that's besides the point. She decided that she would eat the raw oysters. She ended up maybe about overnight, she reported getting sick. She went to the hospital. They weren't in Atlanta, which is 250 miles from any ocean or the Gulf of Mexico. They weren't looking for Vibrio. And she ended up dying after several days of a Vibrio infection. She actually didn't get necrotizing fasciitis. She got primary septicemia. So the family sued. The restaurant went to the restaurant and decided to fight this in Fulton County Superior Court. Looks like they're losing because they had several problems with the Fulton County Health Department about poor refrigeration. Remember I mentioned Vibrios grow roughly between 60 and 120 Fahrenheit? Their refrigerators weren't always at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Do we see a problem here? Yeah, there was. I don't know what they ended up settling for. Basically, for what I could trace on the internet, the settlement was closed and confidential, but I'm pretty sure that the woman's family ended up getting compensated for the loss. So unless you can be absolutely sure that the oysters that you're getting have been on ice for a really long time, be careful. Here's some acknowledgments. So I've taken about a little over 40 minutes to do this, but I have to throw in these acknowledgments. Before I go through acknowledgments, does anybody have any questions so far? Yes, sir.
On your cuts and wounds,
Yes, sir.
mine came into an old scar.
Really?
The guy I was doing wound care with, his came into an old scar. Any skin that's not 100% natural,
Mm-hmm.
it can come in.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, you said before we started that you had Vibrio parahemolyticus. Okay. Vibrio vulnificus has a cousin that's maybe not as bad, or I'll put it to you this way. They don't ask you for money as much as the cousin you don't want to see. Vibrio parahemolyticus, Vibrio vulnificus is number 1 in terms of seafood-related diseases. Vibrio parahemolyticus is number 2. And parahemolyticus usually causes more gastrointestinal problems, but it can cause wound problems, as you found out. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Couple questions. As far as drug prescription stuff, I mean, I've had patients come in and, say they're going down to the coast and say, I've left them with doxycycline to take in case they get it, because they may be down there 3 days.
Right.
And so is there any drug resistance to any of the macrolides, or is there any reason for not doing that other than you don't want to just be handing out antibiotics indiscriminately?
By your question, sir, you must be a healthcare professional, a doctor, pharmacist, nurse practitioner. Okay. Since you've got that credential, while I'm not credentialed that way, it's only a Ph.D., it's piled high and deep. If you feel in your clinical experience that it's worth doing that, fine. You are right. I mean, I'm trying not to get into how to treat
I'm just wondering
this.
if there any resistance to, the macrolides like doxycycline.
I will say this, I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
At least one time, one of my former students that was working with me and another professor, she was actually doing a study on Vibrio and antibiotic resistance, and she did not notice any. I have seen in some of the literature that they're saying in Europe, in the Mediterranean, that resistance is increasing. I have not seen any evidence of that in the United States. So that's my caveat. Yes, ma'am.
Are you at risk going in a saltwater pool?
Like say, for example, if they use, instead of putting chlorine in, they actually use salt water at high concentrations. That's a real good question. Actually, I would say it's less likely because Vibrio vulnificus, it doesn't really like 6% sodium chloride. And we found out, we've actually done studies on Vibrio vulnificus in the lab. We will normally use 20 parts per thousand, which is supposed to be the bare minimum, 30 parts per thousand, which emulates the oceans, like say the bays around Corpus are around 30 to 35 parts per thousand. We've gone up to 40 parts per thousand, and then we've gone, for those of you who still remember your chemistry, 60 parts per thousand, one molar. The Vibrios don't grow at 60 parts per thousand. They don't really like 40 parts per thousand. They really will grow at either 20 or 30. So my off the gut answer would be probably not, but I bet one day somebody proves me wrong. Right, and you don't want to be that 1 in 10 million person who's been proven wrong. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Are you as likely to find Vibrio in fast-moving water as opposed to stagnant water? Like tidal current?
I think somebody asked me that. I would probably say, in theory, no. In reality, yes. One of the grad students that worked, he actually looked at Vibrios in terms of different places. Like he went to Copano Bay, which has a lot of freshwater influence from Mission and Aransas. He went to Baffin Bay, which is a lot more salty. He went to Laguna Madre. He went to the Gulf of Mexico. It's really not the current of the water. It's really the salt concentration. So the salt concentration is more important because the Vibrios are going to move. What Vibrios, though, usually like is that they like to remain stagnant. So in theory, Vibrios form a biofilm, which is like bacteria growing on a surface and like a goo or gel. If there's really a lot of current, and they'll attach to rocks. But still, I think you can find them. So my gut level answer is it's unlikely, but in theory, if the water temperature is right and the salt concentration is fine, you're still gonna find them. Yes, sir, you had another?
These little guys, you said they clean the stuff, but they also free swimming.
Yes, sir.
They, you know, you can be in the back lakes where everybody says it's at, but you can be out in the front, the main bays or the Gulf. It's just where you're at.
Yes, sir. I will tell you that for the study that my grad student did, it was Gabriel Ramirez et al., 2009. The Vibrio concentrations in Copano Bay were pretty low. In Baffin Bay, they were moderately high, and we actually ran some experiments to determine whether or not, if they're in a high salt concentration, they're going to be more susceptible to hydrogen peroxide diluted than not. We were surprised, and we actually also even did an area in Corpus Christi. For those of you who've been to Corpus, south of downtown on Ocean Drive, there's Ropes Park and Cole Park. That's actually our storm drainage outflow. We figured that the Vibrios were going to be more resistant to hydrogen peroxide there than, say, to Bird Island, which is Padre Island National Seashore. We were wrong. It was actually the other way around. They were actually more resistant at Padre Island National Seashore than they were at Ropes Park and Cole Park. So there's a lot of stuff we really don't know. So in theory, again, I would say that shouldn't be the case, but the reality is we really don't know. And with 100 quintillion cells of Vibrio, we're not ever going to get, for those of you who are in healthcare, we're never going to get a representative sample which would have a p-value of 0.05 or less that would really mimic that. So yes, I know you're nodding your head, so you've gone through all of that in professional school. Yeah. Basically, there's a lot we don't know. And the biggest thing about Vibrios is that we're not even sure that all the things that we say are Vibrio vulnificus can't be further delineated into even more species of Vibrios. But we're calling them all Vibrio vulnificus right now. But there's a lot of strange things about this, and having worked with it for the past 12 years, there's a lot we don't know. And I'm only one of the little bit players in Vibrio research, in America. There's a lady named Rita Caldwell who is in Maryland, and basically she's the guru. I mean, I've got maybe, about 50 to 100 presentations. She's got hundreds of them. And she's been doing it for 50 years. And even when she came to A&M Corpus and visited us, there were still some things she didn't know. And she's been looking at this for 50 years.
You said it usually concentrates in the grassy areas and stuff?
It can attach to seagrasses as epiphytes within what's called a biofilm, the little sludge that's on the seagrass surface. But they can be, as that gentleman said, free living. So you really find them both cases. What makes Vibrio go between free living to being on the biofilm? Good question. I don't have a clue.
Might be the same as swimming upstream.
That's true. That's true. You're right. Other questions? I like this. I mean, you guys ask more questions than my students, which is good.
Let me ask another one.
Yes, sir.
You said you have a 1 in a million chance of getting it.
Mhm.
What if I've got it already? Am I at the same chance or am I 1 in 100,000?
I'd say
Or 1
you're
in
probably
10?
at the same chance. Now, your immune system has seen it before.
Yeah.
So your immune system, in theory, should be able to fight it better. I can't guarantee you that.
So if I go flying out and go wade fishing tomorrow and I get sick, don't look you up.
You got it. You got it.
You just have to make that choice.
Mm-hmm. But yes, ma'am, Ms. Hancock.
Are there certain places on the Texas coastline that are worse than others? I don't want to like ban certain areas, but have you seen it worse on certain places on the coastline than others?
I will really be honest with you for the sampling, and Dr. Joanna Mott, who used to be my department chair, went out and she would actually bring the Vibrios back. She'd filter them through, and then she'd give them to me, and I'd experiment on them. From the work that we did together, if there's a greater salt concentration in the water, up to about 35 parts per thousand, it's all equal probability. The lower the salt concentration, the less likely, but it's still possible. Like Copano Bay, where Mission and Aransas flow in, and there's only one little gap in there that they now put a higher bridge over. That had the fewest number of Vibrios, but we still got Vibrios. So are you ever going to have a water-free area on the coast that's absolutely free of Vibrios? Not going to happen. I'm just honest. And the higher the water temperature, the more likely you get it. The year that they had all the hurricanes and the water temperature was really high that year, and we even had hurricanes out in the Atlantic in December. That was actually a pretty high year. I think Gabriel, the grad student, actually found out that we had very high numbers of Vibrio in December, where once the temperature goes below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, Vibrios and a lot of other bacteria become what's called viable but non-culturable. Basically, the bacteria are zombies. They're there in the water, but you can't culture them on plates. But they're there and they can still cause disease. He was actually going out and getting a lot of Vibrios. Let's put it in perspective. We would normally take a sample of 100 milliliters. That's 3.3 mils. That's basically slightly larger than maybe 3 shot glasses. Okay. Normally, in a good day, at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you might get 25 to 100 Vibrio cells per 100 mils. That year, he was getting 500 and 1,000 in December. Yeah. So, yeah, it's really water temperature and salinity. Those are the most important factors. And there's actually a paper recently by Dr. Colwell that talked about climate change. They actually went back and did some sampling, and they're finding out that as the temperature of the Atlantic Ocean, North Atlantic, increases, they can actually go back and look at the samples of preserved fish or shrimp and actually find out through different molecular techniques that there's been an increase in Vibrios over time. That's a paper that was actually, if you're interested in what little spare time you have, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. But this is, for those of you who are wondering, is climate change real? The answer is yes. Is it caused by humans? That's really the question. Or is this natural, or is it a combination of all of the above? Yes, ma'am.
Is that the only kind of flesh-eating bacteria you can get?
No, ma'am. Good question. I wish my students asked me a question like that in class. Vibrio is probably the best known of the bacteria that cause necrotizing fasciitis. There's another one that I talked about before the rest of you came in that's called Aeromonas hydrophila. Aeromonas is found more in freshwater. Like a couple years ago, a young lady from Georgia was ziplining in an Alabama river. She got a cut. She went back home. She ended up running a high fever and they ended amputating both her arms and both her legs. That was Aeromonas, that was necrotizing fasciitis. Another bacteria that can cause it is Group A strep. Group A strep is usually what causes sore throats. Very, very, very rarely, this can actually cause necrotizing fasciitis. It can happen, but it's rare. Other bacteria is a bacteria you've probably never heard of, but they know it in the hospital. It's called Klebsiella pneumoniae. Klebsiella usually causes lung problems, especially if you have a history of ethanol abuse, but that can cause necrotizing fasciitis. So there are, and occasionally, very rarely, Vibrio parahemolyticus. Matter of fact, I'll just basically say this. Any Vibrio species in theory can cause necrotizing fasciitis, but it's more likely if you get it, it's going to be Vibrio vulnificus. Other questions? I like this.
You said it passes up the food chain?
Yes, sir.
So you go catch a trout, you eat sushi?
I personally don't.
I mean, do you think it a chance?
You might be, because it might be in the tissues, but basically once something eats it, Vibrios actually can be sort of resistant to stomach acid. Thanks for coming. And actually you will find out that people who have been taking like reflux inhibitors, like Nexium, or omeprazole is the common name, they have a greater predisposition for getting gastrointestinal problems with Vibrio. So in theory, you probably can. The reality is that it's still not likely. I'll be honest with you folks. Do you know the most dangerous thing all of us did this morning? We got up and we drove our cars or trucks. That's the most dangerous thing that all of us do. So what I try to do when I give these talks is I try to put risk in terms of relativity. Does anybody know? EMT people, don't answer this, because I know you know. But does anybody know how many people die on roads in the United States per year? I know the EMT people know it. It's 33,000, roughly 31 to 33,000 per year. But yet, you don't see us freaking out about driving, my Honda Accord or your F-150 down the road. So putting it in relative perspective, do you know the most dangerous animal in the United States? And it may not be a mammal or a fish, huh?
Mosquito.
Mosquitoes, well, actually that would be number 2. What's number 1? And the hospital personnel would know this. Bee stings, bee and wasp stings. You're more likely to get anaphylactic shock with a bee or wasp sting than you are from getting eaten off the Texas coast by a great white or a bull shark. Yes, ma'am.
If you got that bacteria, say, in a finger, how do you keep it stabilized so it doesn't go higher?
Actually, you can't. You would have to go get treated. You'd have to go. Anytime you see that little scar, if you know it's Vibrio, if it keeps growing. So just go to the emergency room and tell them that you had exposure to salt or brackish water. That's the key.
My husband got pricked on his finger from a gat-back hose, and they said he could have died within 20 hours from a flesh-eating bacteria.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was in November, and now they're going to amputate his finger. So I was wondering how they keep it from going farther. The antibiotics they gave him?
Basically, the antibiotics, and I'll just say it's doxycycline, macrolides, fluoroquinolones, they should work. Why they work for some people and not for others, that's a good question. I don't have a clue. But that is something to consider. But yeah, again, when you get a little cut, you really don't think about stuff. You really don't. Yes, ma'am.
I was involved in a case where we had a lady that had a vaginal delivery, and her diagnosis was flesh eating. Would it be group A?
Yes, ma'am, it's probably group A. Group A. Group A strep, or it could even be Group B strep. And if she's just giving birth, I'd say it's more likely Group B strep than Group A.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
She survived, but she coded.
Ooh, not a good
Yes,
thing.
yes.
Yeah, Group B strep. Group B strep is sort of really, really rare for necrotizing fasciitis, but it can happen. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I worked my way through college as a uncertified nurses aide at Grady Hospital in Atlanta. Grady is to Atlanta what Parkland is to Dallas. And yeah, I saw them run a lot of codes on a lot of things, but I never saw it for somebody with bacterial, thank you, bacterial-associated sepsis. So that was a rarity, especially vaginal delivery. So, since I know most of you are getting ready to go, I just want to end this by thanking the people who gave me money, or the government agencies who did. My collaborators, Dr. Joanna Mott used to be my department chair at A&M Corpus. She got me interested in Vibrios. She's moved to Virginia to be closer to her daughter. Her daughter actually was at Johns Hopkins, and now she's at Harvard. And she just took a job at Sacramento State in California. Dr. Suzette Chopin helped me apply for grants so I could do this. She just retired from TAMU CC. Gabriel Ramirez and Amanda Smith are former grad students of Dr. Mott's that I worked with. Grad students that I worked with were Miguel Alexis Gitzet, Bruce, who's hoping to defend his master's on July 27th. And then Erin, who decided to move off with her boyfriend to Philadelphia and teach in Philadelphia City schools. So these are some of the undergrads that I've worked with. A lot of my undergrads, I don't pay them, but they end up working and volunteering, and I write pretty decent letters of rec for med school, farm school, dental school, you know, clinical lab science program, things like that. So a lot of them do that, and also for PhD programs. And then finally, these are my current students as of spring, so I want to thank them for the hard work that they put in. So on that note, thanks, and do you have any other questions? Any other questions, folks? Well, I just want to thank Mrs. Hancock for inviting me up here. It's a pleasure. I enjoy talking to lay audiences, and I hope you learned something. And I hope you learned, don't fear the hype. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Very nice presentation.
Thank you.
I like it when you present.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you.